And we're starting. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Tech Tuesday webinar series. Today we're going to be going over enhancing WVD with Citrix. I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Mr. Ryan Hinkleman. He is our Director of Hybrid Services here at Coretek Services. But before I hand it to Ryan to run through the deck he's prepared for us today, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As always, we will be recording today's webinar and sending it out to you along with a copy of the deck so that you can refer back to it. Or if you're checking out this webinar on demand, you'll be able to view it at your leisure. We'll also have available at the end of the webinar the ability to answer some of your questions. So here inside of the Teams live event, there is a Q&A feature. So please feel free to go ahead and submit any questions you have along the way, and we'll, like I said, try and save some time at the end to go over those. With all the boring stuff out of the way, Ryan, thanks for joining us today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. So today we're going to talk about enhancing WVD with Citrix as an overlay, commonly referred to as Citrix on WVD. So first and foremost, just want to kind of highlight who we are and why we're giving this talk today. And first and foremost, we are a Citrix Platinum partner and have been for many, many years, and have brought about 15 years, our entire company history of end user compute excellence to the table through many, many years with both Citrix and VMware to our friends at Microsoft. And as they have developed the WVD solution set, we were there early on doing some of the boot camps, advising some of the key folks in Microsoft as to what we thought important features at the onset were, and generally being there and being ready to be in sync with them from day one of launch. And have executed on over 40 pilots and proof of concepts so far to date, if not more. So really moving on, where does this take us? And so this takes us to looking at taking the best of both worlds, really. The dynamic cloud-based compute of WVD, and marrying it to all of the technology and history and protocol capabilities that Citrix has, and really getting a best-of-breed solution. And this is foundationally based on CVADs, essentially the Citrix cloud-based SaaS offering for the Citrix product set from there. And what that really does, as you can see, is it manages not only the traditional on-prem that you had, but now that you've moved some of your workloads to the cloud and to WVD, we can manage both of those uniformly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we can make sure that we're going to be compliant, secure, etc. going forward. So really, conceptually, this is something that is a very, very simple drawing, but this is something that resonates for many, many people, because it's not as though a lot of people can really flip a switch overnight and just be on an entirely new platform in the cloud. And what you really need is somewhat of a journey to get there. And we've seen that journey in different levels of maturity in our customers so far. And it takes time. So as we have that user that's now, likely remote and has a mix of those resources that are on-prem and some of those now in the cloud, we want them to have a unified experience. And with Citrix sitting on top of WVD, we can enable that. So that as we have, as you can see, kind of that march from maybe a cloud-first migration approach to our data centers being migrated to Azure, we can take and project those applications as they're migrated, modernized into modern infrastructures. We can reproject those applications from the Azure data center as they migrate and marry our application delivery to those overall efforts, and without the user really having to do anything on their behalf to realize the benefits of that, or even know which resources they're using, and it may very well be a mix over time. So this just simply illustrates very simply that we can enable that as that progression continues. So what do you get when you combine this other than just the ability to operate in a hybrid fashion? Well, of course, we're going to see that we get a hybrid cloud, and that means, maybe a private cloud, maybe some of the other clouds, but certainly centered on Azure and WVD. We give people the experience they want in that we have the workspace application and all of the platforms it supports, from iOS and Android to Chromebooks to a plethora of thin devices out there, all understand and have embraced the ICA protocol for years in its many variants. We have all of the controls and monitoring capabilities of advanced analytics built right in to the solution, and have had access to those for a long time, and your teams might be already familiar with many of these pieces and parts that carry over. And also you get the absolute best Teams and Office and really M365 experience through caching of OneDrive, Outlook, offloading of Teams audio and video to the endpoint device for the maximum acceleration. All of these things in one package, no matter where you're delivering it from. As you can see under the hood, there's actually a plethora of features and devices, features and functions that really add value to the solution. We're not going to necessarily drive into any one of these today, but you can see that the integrations are deep. We'll talk about maybe a few of them at a high level that have some major impacts on cost, functionality, etc. But you can see, you have some of the security features that app protection might offer you, from a keystroke or screenshot protection as your users are now at home working with sensitive data. You have some of the cost controls of auto scale. You have some of the advanced monitoring and analytics there that really are going to define a robust solution for you as you maybe have some regulated workloads out there, such as patient data or financial data or anything really under regulation that might be required. So what do we add as far as value add? You have, virtual apps and desktop service, you have workspace, you have this really flexible and comprehensive model to take you forward, and we're going to talk more to that here as we move forward. And we really like to talk into kind of 3 categories today. I think there's more. I mean, you saw those features, but we'll try to break them down as they're applicable into 3 categories of how we really see this, these benefits and value add on top of a WVD environment. So experience, we want to have a wonderful experience for the user. We talked about that capability and how there's such a demand for that, and if you have a high quality experience, you'll delight your users, and if you have a poor video or audio experience, you'll quickly find out just the opposite in a dramatic way. Security, we talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit more here. And then management, so simple, scalable. We're going to take the best parts of WVD in its essentially unlimited capabilities for scale to your needs and elasticity and some DR and business continuity features, and really enumerate very, very quickly with some of the added features how we can take best advantage of that in a dynamic way. So really talking about unified management. Hey, again, we can do this not only from a WVD perspective, but we now have the ability to bring in multiple resource locations and do so with one contiguous management plane. If your teams are used to managing Citrix and doing so with a set of tools and they're doing it on-prem, those same set of tools, those same management planes will be visible across all of your workloads, regardless of their location, in all scenarios, without having an entirely set of different tools, a different location to be able to manage them from. It's absolutely uniform in its and familiar in its approach. So day-to-day management, again, so we have best-in-class OS and application management. So MCS and some of the capabilities that your teams have potentially learned over the years around provisioning, knowing that those are going to carry forward in a large sense in some of their principles. We have all the principles of non-persistence built right in, and we can provision as required those machines, and of course then deprovision them from a cost savings perspective. We have built-in workspace environment management, so we'll talk a little bit about some of that later from a financial perspective, but it allows us to truly manage on a very granular level the experience, settings, features, functions that a user might get as they log in and realize what their privileges are and how to manage that experience going forward. It's especially powerful when mated with FS logic from a capability perspective of managing some of that user persona. And should we need to, and should we have the capability and desire within our support organization, we can do a lot of self-service features as well by integrating into our ServiceNow platform. So we're going to get a really dynamic platform that is going to be uniform through all of our WVD experience, where the user can take a lot of actions on their own, and should we have issues, we can roll forward, roll back, and dynamically provision as required. So again, in management, troubleshooting. So we have a lot of tools that have a lot of exposure and experience throughout the years of maturity that we can take forward into WVD with us and forward into our cloud journey. We've got all of the information that's readily available in Director as that tool has matured over the years, with its capabilities to tell you session state very easily without in one unified GUI what some of the basic session parameters are as far as applications, workloads, any experienced latency that user might be receiving, whether that be from an internet-based latency or other. And we get to really then even see from an HDX insight standpoint, if we're then looking at that traffic as it's crossing the wire, what might be the issue with that. Taking one step further, even combined with then a Citrix SD-WAN solution, you have the ability to accelerate all of those different virtual channels separately through the capabilities of understanding the ICA protocol and getting the best possible experience, and then the feedback on it. So you're going to get your teams that already have the support understanding of what they need to do, the metrics and the ease of use, as far as being able to quickly find a user, find an application, understand their needs, and quickly resolve that more often with a first contact resolution in a lower time to resolve, because we provided those metrics and understanding right away at a higher level of fidelity initially with those common tool sets that you already have a training investment in with your folks. So again, that highly efficient protocol. HDX has been around for a long time. ICA protocol has been around for years and has been modified and continuously evolved to assure that we have the absolute best protocol possible for remoting. Early on, the capabilities were there to be extremely low bandwidth, and we've seen advancements in being able to deal with extremely high loss, extremely high latency, the demands of 3D graphics. Now with the latest enlightened data transport, a whole nother level of performance and capability around dealing with what really is in a modern remoting session and considering all of those capabilities. We have innovative resource optimization through some of the ONE technologies that allow us to manage CPU RAM, and then of course with the reduction in IO footprint of MCSIO, we're potentially saving on some of the I/O that would otherwise be spilled to potentially a premium disk, and having some positive impacts on the amount of data we might be egressing, on our disk classes and sizing, and then of course on our CPU and RAM optimization from an overall VM size perspective. These all have very real impacts on an on-demand cost basis that is WVD, and potentially allows you to get that much more dense while still maintaining a great user experience for everyone. So moving on to security. So this is where we talked about some of the app protection modules. So as you have those users that may be in remote locations working with sensitive data that you need to assure users cannot manipulate, and that may be one of the reasons that led you to having that data locked up in your data center or in an Azure instance to begin with so that you could control that data. This really takes that principle to the edge and makes sure that the manipulation of that data cannot occur through any of these means, by scrambling keystrokes, by doing watermarking, by preventing screen captures, and under certain scenarios, whether that be by a threshold that you've reached through analytics, by kicking off a session recording, or by just simple policy, have the means to be able to record a session as it's taking place so that you could review it later from a security and compliance perspective. And this truly all really adds up to IP loss prevention for anybody that's extraordinarily sensitive to that. So we have very, very fine-grained context-aware policy, so we can do those scenario-based access restrictions. So based on who the user is, where they may be coming from, maybe what the content is in question, we can do some modeling and really fine-tune what that user's experience is and how they're able to manipulate their session and the underlying data within. There may be some very real scenarios where you wish to allow printing to that remote endpoint, and there may be some situations where you do not. And that may vary based on whether that user is coming from a known and internal resource where they're simply trying to map a printer that's in your office versus somebody being at home, as a very simple example, where you may or may not want to do that. Or maybe you do in both situations, depending upon that user. We have all of those granular controls to be able to control each of those virtual channels for those different aspects of policy, all individually with a number of facets that will provide you value around security, compliance, and overall, compliance to any regulations you might be under. Yep. So kind of moving into user experience. These are all the things that really are going to make sure that you have the most vibrant local-like experience with your WVD cloud-based desktop, and really can make sure that you have the widest range of use cases. So as we all know, it's really all about your use case and understanding who your users are in each scenario so that you can optimize the compute. Thus, in WVD, because of its on-demand resourcing, the spend behind that, while still allowing for the users to have an absolutely superior experience. So by having this adaptable protocol, we can save on packets when it's appropriate to do so, and adapt up when the user calls for a richer experience through some enhanced content or whatever the case may be. And we can also do some of the things like local text echo that really gives the user the feeling that they are interacting locally while we do some of the magic in the background to make sure that those packets are actually received on the other side and displayed in the session. We'll do things around Skype and Teams support, as we talked about earlier, to make sure that that content is redirected outside of the session and direct workspace app so that it can be rendered locally. And we can talk at some point about really under the covers how that works. But the net effect is that the user gets a local audio and video experience that alleviates a lot of the overall compute load on your WVD, allowing you to not have to account for that overhead in some of your sizing exercises for those WVD workloads, which saves you money and also allows for local rendering of that audio video stream to the client for the best possible quality. And we could support things like graphic acceleration, which is huge for anybody that might need that for a large amount of video or most popular engineering workloads, etc. Those use cases are now possible on a WVD workload with an N-class machine. So again, we've got simplicity, we've got the driverless, so we can accommodate all of those users that may be on a varied device. We can assure that we're able to print through universal printing. We've got all of the different things we can do with all of the different authentication methods out there. So whatever you may have as a standard is typically we're able to tie into that and support, whether it be SAML, AAD, Okta, whatever the case may be. From an authentication standpoint, we can work with those and provide a lot of flexibility in how we authenticate users and still do so in a strong and secure fashion. So this is the part where we really start talking about some of the financial impacts, because obviously there is Windows Virtual Desktop and some of the licensing benefits it provides, and then there is kind of that run and maintain. So really, how does this stack up when you start adding products onto WVD? Well, what we need to understand is there's some of the infrastructure, the compute, the storage, the networking that we would have regardless. That's your virtual desktop sitting in the cloud. But through some of the capabilities that we have at our disposal, whether that be Citrix Autoscale, allowing us to dynamically size up and down our delivery groups and our pools of resource to match our demand very, very precisely at time of need. And through some of the technologies that we talked about earlier in Citrix WEM, Workspace Environment Manager, to be able to closely control some of the aspects of performance within a session, we're actually able to edge down some of the infrastructure in a lot of cases. From an operational cost perspective, there's a pretty considerable bump there, because more often than not, you don't have to do as much retraining of your users. It's more of an extension of what they already know through their experience with the product. There is that unified pane of glass between any legacy resources that you might have, as well as your WVD capabilities, without having to get into all of the net new panes of glass, infrastructure management capabilities. You can see things as you always have. And it doesn't matter where you might be in that workflow, in that migration we talked about, we can still see those resources one for one uniformly. And then, of course, there's other add-ons that we might have in there that we no longer potentially need, but we do supplant that with the value add that we've talked about with Citrix as well. So again, this is kind of talks to some of these. So there's that infrastructure cost management. So using WEM, using the protocol, using autoscale and some load balancing, we can do some of those pieces of cost reduction into that infrastructure simply by tightly managing those resources with the tools allocated to us as a value add. Autoscale is a tremendous piece of value, and it allows you to tightly control the resources that you have allotted in a pool based on how your users utilize them. If you have a group of 8 to 5 users, you're highly incented to discontinue their use as soon as we know that they're done being productive with that session and that machine for the day, log them off and reclaim that compute down into a deprovisioned state so that we can cease being charged for it. And smart application of auto scale is key in that fact and in cost savings going forward. Operationally, this is just what we talked about. We have our time to resolve because we have that single pane of glass. We have all of our lifecycle management capabilities that we have from truly migrating those application workloads over time to a hybrid workload, and we have that unified tool set to allow us to do so. So really, I just wanted to hit on kind of those three main areas today of how this positively impacts us. You can see that we've been doing this for a long time, and really hope that you enjoyed and kind of understand some of the highline benefits, and we'll be happy to take any questions if they were sent in.
Yeah, let me take a look here at what we've had submitted. So here's a question, and I know I think you touched on it actually probably a little bit here when you were talking about the financial portion of it. But how would you address with potentially an executive who looks at it as a Citrix versus Microsoft expense? Like how would you go about talking to them and making them see that this isn't a verse situation, this isn't a one or the other, there's actually a reason to go for both?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple lines that are typically get drawn in this scenario, but I think there's a few places where the story of better together really truly resonates. Any regulated business, there's a strong case for this because the Citrix product and the protocol and the stack itself is, for example, FIPS certified. So if you have a FIPS requirement, common criteria, some of those things where Citrix has built this and has executed on this a long time, those granular policies around security capabilities in that product are going to really truly bolster the capabilities and some of the dynamic capabilities that WVD just inherently has because it's an on-demand resource. And now you can get all of the capabilities of a WVD, Windows 10 multi-session, which is a true game changer from an overall compatibility and density perspective, along with all of those capabilities you need to stay compliant, for example, and have the best possible means of assuring your IP control. And the other avenue I would go down is, especially if you are on that cloud-based journey, it may not be practical, as we talked about, to simply flip a switch. And especially some of our larger clients, and we've had the luxury of working with some fairly large clients, there's any number of workloads that need to be changed, and this is a part of a larger overall migration that's not going to happen in the space of, it'll happen in the space of maybe an entire hardware refresh, right? Where as hardware refreshes comes up for aspects of their solution, they're going to look to flex that into Azure under WVD. And as we build that OS pipeline, it's there, but we don't necessarily want our teams managing, monitoring, and otherwise controlling two different systems and constantly having a set of change. Here we can really manage, monitor, and overall provide a solution out of one integrated solution, regardless of where that resource might sit and why.
Great, and I know we're a little over time here, but just one final question. So really, and this is kind of I think a fantastic question for us because it's around, is WVD on Citrix, how does a third party like Coretek factor into this? And I think we're actually really uniquely positioned as a third party to come in, but how do we sort of come in and work with someone's internal IT team to help them, roll this out, manage it, all that good stuff?
Any number of ways. So sometimes our mutual partners in Microsoft actually ask for our services. Our partners in Citrix, the same. And we've actually worked in scenarios where all three of us jointly, or potentially have Coretek led by obviously finding us on our website. Obviously, if you're here today, you found us in some of our social platforms, etc. Call us, email us, find me online, and we can engage. And what we would typically do is understand first and foremost the scope of what your vision is and where it makes sense to do this and how this might look from a technological perspective, from a costing perspective, moving forward, and kind of set that vision and then define a scope to get you started.
Fantastic. And to Ryan's point, if you are interested, you can, let me see, let's see if we can't get it to go to the next slide here. Been having some slight technical difficulties throughout, but here we go. You can check out our YouTube page, that is our Coretek Services YouTube page. We do have the Tech Tuesday webinar series there as a playlist. So we'll be uploading this particular webinar there as well, but there are also all of our previous webinars can be found there as well. So if you are interested, obviously we'll be sending out the link to this particular recording, but if you're interested in taking a look back at some of the great content we've produced in previous weeks, I know Ryan has been a featured guest on quite a few and has talked on quite a few subjects, but you can see just here, even in the screenshot, we like to bounce around and cover all the various that we support here at Coretek. You can go ahead and subscribe to that to get make sure that you're kept up to date with all the latest videos once they go live. And the best way to do that is actually to ring that little bell there. YouTube made a change to their algorithm not so long ago, and that is probably the best way to make sure you get notified. If you don't ring the bell, you probably won't see it depending on how often you're on YouTube, but it is a really great way to keep up to date with all the great content that we're lucky enough to have Ryan and all the other great LOB owners here at Coretek join us and spend some time with us. So want to thank everybody who joined us today live. We will be sending out this recording, like I said, so whether you want to take a look back at it or if you're viewing it for the first time, you'll have that ability. And to Ryan's point, you can either go ahead and find us online at coretek.com. You can reply to the email once it's sent out, or you can find either Ryan or myself on LinkedIn and reach out, and we'd be happy to connect you with the appropriate people. So thanks again, and everyone have a fantastic afternoon. We are